I'm Christopher Lee. Join me for 100 years of horror.
Your sign till you confess. And if you don't, I'll feed you to the villagers. You're going to give him life?
Yes. Not for the purposes that you think, Igor. I'm giving him another brain.
This was the first different conception of the monster in 20 years. It also established that Universal Pictures had no right to the story itself. These 2 points would be extremely important a few years later, when a small English company called Hammer Films decided to do the first Frankenstein film in color. And a great many of them were given birth right here at Bray Studios, ushering in an entirely new era of horror.
Hammer Films, based in London with a small studio on the River Thames, had specialized in low-budget action and suspense films in the early 1950s. Their success in the US made them think the market might be ready for a new version of Frankenstein.
Oh, what are you going to do? For your sake and to protect Elizabeth, I've so far kept silent. But now I shall go to the authorities and have them destroy that creature. And see that you pay for these atrocities. No!
What Hammer did with The Curse of Frankenstein is they were more based on a grand guignol type of concept. Everything was very colorful, everything was very bloody and that sort of thing. I think in that sense, Curse of Frankenstein may be one of those pivotal horror films. It changed the look of horror films forever.
Peter Cushing brought a decadent elegance to the role of Baron Frankenstein. Witty, self-possessed, and obsessive.
We've only just started, just opened the door. Look, now's the time to go through that door and find what lies beyond it. But don't you see, Paul? We've discovered the source of life itself, and we've used it to restore a creature that was dead.
Luckily for me, anyway, the creature was irreversibly destroyed in a vat of acid, and Dr. Frankenstein was last seen walking to the guillotine. But he had cheated death before. A year later, he was back at his work.
Who is he? Nobody. He isn't born yet.
The makeup, costumes, and even some of the expressions of Michael Gwynne as this new pathetic creation mirrored the stage portrayal by Hamilton Dean some 25 years before.
Anesthetic! Quick, man! Switch off!
Peter Cushing starred in a total of 6 Frankenstein films from 1957 to 1973, each time bringing a subtle difference to his interpretation, but always remaining consistent. It was a given fact that Frankenstein would ultimately fail, but the driving force of his personality and the horrors that fell in his wake kept the films interesting to both Cushing and his worldwide audience.
Everybody loved Peter. He was very gentlemanly. He adored his wife. He was kind, endlessly considerate and thoughtful, and I can't speak too highly of him.
Of the 7 Hammer films about Frankenstein, 5 were directed by Terence Fisher, a man vastly underrated in his lifetime.
He always knew exactly what he wanted, and that's why the films were made fast and the way they were, and he knew exactly the shots, exactly the mood, and it always rolled. It was so easy. But we always had fun, always had a lot of laughs.
I'd seen the original Frankenstein, which I think is nobody will ever approach the original. I didn't see any of the others. I don't see many horror films, but please don't tell anybody. I don't know, it's more fun. One always tries to think of the right way to do it in the most effective way. And obviously, I usually think of the most effective way visually. Because of, you know, having been a DP, and still am, I always think visually first.
You are interrupting my work.
Your work. The work of the devil.
Hands, please, Father.
Freddie Francis, one of Britain's most distinguished DPs, that is, director of photography, turned to directing in the 1960s and made a game attempt at combining the Hammer style with the Universal type plot and monster.
Peter Cushing as the Baron.
Probably the main, again, one of the other main story differences was the shift of emphasis. In the Universal series, which stemmed off in the first Frankenstein in 1931, the emphasis was really on the monster, or that was the character you went to see, even though he may have been relegated to a supporting role in the later films. But it was still the monster you went to see. In the Hammer films, it was Dr. Frankenstein. It was the Baron, played by Peter Cushing.
You see, a shield of indestructible matter.
What is it for?
What is it for? To give life after death, my friend, that's what it's for. Life after death.
Peter was back with even wilder ideas in Frankenstein Created Woman, featuring Playboy centerfold Susan Denberg.
I knew her and dated her very briefly when I was in London for the opening of the London Playboy Club. If you find footage of that opening, I'm there with her in a looking stunning in a miniskirt. She was wearing the miniskirt. And she was a very striking lady. She did some Star Trek here too. She was doing some films, and then I think I got lost along the way.
Who am I?
There's a monster at last!
No matter how ridiculous the monster might have looked, Peter Cushing as the Baron was always the very image of propriety.
To Baron Frankenstein, creator of man.
If I succeeded this time, then every sacrifice will have been worthwhile.
To at least 3 generations of film fans, there is really only one Baron Frankenstein. And most assuredly, there will never be another Peter Cushing.
In the United States, the Frankenstein monster was also making a comeback, but admittedly in films without the polish and panache of the Hammer productions. The 1950s also saw Frankenstein films featuring the Baron character as an actual American citizen.
I want him to know and feel pain. What I create, I must control. Go on, activate this body.
1957's I Was a Teenage Frankenstein saw Whit Bissell standing in for the Baron with Gary Conway as the monster. This ludicrous little chiller, more or less, exploited the average teenager's fear of having bad skin.
When the stitches are out, he'll pass for a normal, quite attractive teenager.
It really is an example of how, you know, lightning doesn't always strike twice, and that people who are sometimes responsible for a really good picture can't ever seem to duplicate their success.
I should destroy you as dangerous evidence.
American International, which had produced Teenage Frankenstein, followed it up with a spin-off of sorts, How to Make a Monster. Robert Harris is more or less the Dr. Frankenstein of this story, as an insane makeup wizard who creates his own teen Frankenstein via hypnosis.
This maniacal strength will linger in your arms and hands, and with it you'll destroy your real enemies, exactly as I instruct you.
Pending autopsy findings, I would say that he was attacked from behind by someone with fiendish strength.
So what do we have to do? Look for a monster?
We're not talking about actors. We mean a real monster.
In addition to teenage Frankensteins and their ilk, were various other creations slapped together either by the Baron himself, or, in the case of the classic Jesse James meets Frankenstein's daughter, the Baroness.
Save your strength, Jesse James. You will need it.
One of the silliest of these Frankenstein knockoffs was Frankenstein's Daughter, released in 1954. But the Baroness is nowhere to be found, because in this instance, Frankenstein's daughter is actually a hideously deformed monster, resembling something of a cross between a longshoreman and a roller derby queen.
I'll never forget the morning when they presented the monster, and this is not 2 weeks ahead of time or 4 months ahead of time. This is like right now, bang, monster time. And my heart dropped on my stomach. I said, this is not that pretty girl. You know, well, you wanted a monster, and boy, God, you got one. I said, yes, I do. Go, you know, you're on. You come in left to right and exit right to left and make a lot of noise while you're going through. So it was, but it was just a that was my biggest disappointment in that particular movie. And I said, oh God, what have I created here? What have I done?
When the original Universal films were sold to television in 1957, low-budget imitations sprang up. For once, Morris actually played Frankenstein, a descendant of the original disfigured by the Nazis during World War II.
Deep in the bowels of the earth, he buried his creature, his creation. This gets you some eyes.
What kind of dealings do you have with the director of the morgue? Are you interested in corpses?
His new atomic-powered monster stumbled around in bandages, wearing what appeared to be a rubbish container on his head. An unsold television pilot tried to combine the Hammer flavor with Hollywood talent. Director Kurt Siodmak had written Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. Anton Diffring had starred in Hammer's The Man Who Could Cheat Death. And because Screen Gems had licensed the Universal films for television, they could use the Jack Pierce design for the monster. It didn't help.
Your brain is alive again, Albert. It can function. It has intelligence. You wanted life, and I have given it to you. Yours was the brain that I needed, and it's the brain that makes it all work.
As America moved into the 1960s, so too did Frankenstein, but often under the most embarrassing of circumstances. Not only had American filmmakers all but abandoned the Baron, but they often ignored the monster as well.
We have come here to this planet for one purpose only, to acquire breeding stock to repopulate our planet.
Frankenstein Meets the Space Monster had neither Frankenstein nor a real space monster, but at least it had a somewhat intriguing title.
We have done well, Nadia.
I am pleased, Princess. You are satisfied.
I will be satisfied when we have enough more like her to commence phase 3.
Even further off the track was the Japanese-produced Frankenstein Conquers the World.
And I think after the 40s, monsters, classic monsters, probably took a back seat to sort of atomic horrors of the 50s. You would get Frankenstein in Japan growing to be a giant and fighting a dinosaur, and you would get Frankenstein fighting space monsters. I mean, they really weren't going to go back and make a Gothic thing, but they were going to take that name and try to, you know, bridge it over.
Well, he wasn't Frankenstein. He wasn't even Frankenstein's monster. But kids loved the film, and it was a hit with matinee audiences throughout the globe.
The chain hurt you.
Hammer Films put the Frankenstein legend back on track. Horror of Frankenstein reintroduced audiences to the Baron.
That was a very different film from the other two because Jimmy was irrepressible. He had a great sense of humor. We used to go and get it out of our systems at lunchtime. We went into the restaurant, laughed ourselves silly about everything, calmed down, and then Jimmy said, "Now be serious. No more smiles." So we did it that way. He was just great. He just bubbled all the time in enthusiasm.
I suddenly thought, well, I haven't directed yet. Let's try that. So I said, if you let me direct it, I'll do the rewrite for you. So they said, yeah, fine. So that's why I did it, because I hadn't done it before. the finished product, I had a lot of fun doing it. I had the most fun ever directing that movie. Directing is a lot of fun, especially when you're a producer as well. It's like being God from 8 till 6 every day. Which is not a good position to be in, be the writer, producer and the director, because there's nobody to tell you you're making a mistake.
I am my father's daughter.
You are referring to animal transplants.
Human.
The late 60s also saw production commence on Lady Frankenstein, yet another retelling of the time-worn saga, but with a gorier approach than previous Frankenstein opuses.
Think of it. Think of me. Think of possessing me. Would you like to have my body bend to you? Would you like to make love to me?
I hope Mr. Morgan's brain is as cooperative.
It will be, Charles.
Stand!
Kill the monster! Storm their castle!
Mel Brooks and Gene Wilder brought the ingenious parody Young Frankenstein to the screen, following their Western spoof Blazing Saddles. Brooks insisted on black and white to keep the period effect. He was right, and the film made over $30 million, over 7 times its production cost.
My creation!
Sky means business.
The charmingly familiar lab was packed with the electrical gizmos and flashes designed by Kenneth Strickfaden for the original Universal films.
Yes! To get us into the laboratory. Yes! And it was you who left my grandfather's book out for me to find. Yes! So that I would... Yes! Then you and Victor were... Say it. He was my boyfriend!
Well, that didn't happen in the book. But the cinema has bred more varieties of monstrosities bearing the name of Frankenstein than even Mary Shelley's garrulous monster ever dreamed of.
One of the most publicized films of 1994 was Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Frankenstein, indeed horror films in general, had never been regarded as Class A material. One never saw John Ford directing the creation scene, or Tyrone Power digging in a graveyard. And even though the original films of the 1930s were major releases for Universal, Universal itself was not one of the major studios. But here was a gigantic production with Kenneth Branagh starring and directing.
I wanted somebody who would be frightening and somebody who would be heartbreaking and who would relish a challenge of being very different and being in disguise.
Now, at the end of the 20th century, the concept of creating life through medical science is no longer fiction. Doctors can transplant corneas and hearts, implant artificial organs, resuscitate people from certain death, and artificially create new life forms by recombining DNA, the basic genetic building block of life.
One can only hope that our contemporary scientists will do what no film Frankenstein ever did, take responsibility for their actions.